Welcome back to Scott Buys Houses. I'm Scott Mitchell, owner of Otter Buy Homes. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about X factors in real estate investing. Now, your first question is probably, Scott, what is an X factor? An X factor is simply something that differentiates that target property. And by target property, I mean the property that you're assessing, that you're going to be making an offer on, that differentiates it from other comparable sales in the area that you may be using to determine that property's after rehab value. Now, a lot of times these X factors are going to affect that target property's value in an unknown way, but it's usually going to be in a negative way. How much of a negative impact it may have on that home's value is to be determined. You don't often know this, and therefore there is some inherent risk when you're making offers on properties with X factors involved. Today, I want to talk to you about 5 X factors that I've come across in my 10 years of real estate investing that has a dramatic impact on a home's resale value. The first factor that I want to talk to you about today are railroad tracks. Now, we've all probably seen movies where the main character is staying at a hotel or staying in a home where there are railroad tracks nearby, and a train comes barreling through in the middle of the night and it shakes the whole house, and the main character wakes up frantically. Now, imagine living in a home where you're a block away or less from a railroad track, and a train comes barreling through in the middle of the day, and it, pulls its horn, and it disturbs your peaceful enjoyment of the property. Obviously, that's going to have a huge impact on a home's value. Now, with that being said, generally speaking, you're not going to find a lot of homes located near railroad tracks because typically speaking, property around railroad tracks are more like industrial and commercial properties. But from time to time, you will find homes that are located within earshot of a train track. I looked at a home a couple of years ago, and the home was literally maybe less than 100 yards from a railroad track. And the seller was telling me, look, I've lived here for 20 years, and I am just tired. I am done with hearing trains come through at all hours of the day. Obviously, that was a distressed seller, somebody who wanted to get out of their home and get out quickly. But it had a huge impact on my ability to make an offer on that property because I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to sell it? If I go to rehab it and flip it, who's going to buy this house when there are railroad tracks running right through the backyard, essentially? So obviously, that was a really tough property to purchase, and I wasn't able to offer the seller what he needed in order to sell his property and relocate. So for all I know, he may still very well be living there because it would be a tough property to sell. The second factor that I want to talk to you about today are aerial impediments. And what I mean by that are things like power lines, water towers, billboards, things that you can see from the yard of that property. And an example of this is I was looking at a property a few years ago where there was a big water tower, and it was located just maybe a couple hundred yards off of the seller's back porch. So when you sat on the back porch and you look out over the backyard, what do you see? You see a big old water tower. And I talked to the seller about it. He said, well, we've been living here for 15 years now, and we've kind of gotten used to it. We don't even see the water tower anymore. But here's the thing. When you go to sell that property, what is the first thing that a potential home buyer is going to notice? They're going to notice that water tower, or it could be power lines that run right through the backyard. Nobody wants to live underneath power lines. Or if you're making an offer in a more urban environment, you're not going to see this very often in the suburbs or in rural areas, but a lot of times if you're investing in an urban environment like Nashville, where I'm located, you're going to have billboards that are in plain sight of a target property's backyard. Again, same thing. Nobody wants to step out on their back patio to have a cup of coffee in the morning and be staring up at a billboard. Unless, of course, it's got my face on it, in which case maybe it'd be, a selling point. But I digress. The third X factor that I want to talk to you about today are things like mobile home parks or other distressed properties that you are able to observe as you drive in to look at a target property. So sometimes a property will be in a small neighborhood, but right outside that neighborhood is an old dilapidated mobile home park, or maybe there are some distressed properties that are really an eyesore. Now, these mobile home parks or distressed properties may not be in direct eyesight of that home's front or back porch, but a prospective home buyer has to see that distressed property or that mobile home park as they drive in. And that just kind of gives a home buyer a negative perception of their home's value. And obviously, you have to kind of assess that to determine how much is this going to impact the sellability of the home when I go to resell it, and how is it going to impact the value? What am I going to be able to get for this property on the back end? And these factors may impact properties by as little as 10% up to 40 or 50%. So obviously they can have a huge impact on a home's resale value, and you have to consider them when making offers. The fourth X factor that I want to talk to you about are things like commercial or industrial properties that are located in the immediate vicinity of your target property. Now, these things might be retail spaces, which could be a positive. There could be some very nice shops that you pass within a few blocks of your target property. That could be a benefit. For instance, if you're buying a home or if you're making an offer on a home and there's this nice boutique coffee shop just a couple blocks away, that is an X factor that could possibly have a positive impact on that home's value, because maybe the prospective buyer wants to be able to walk down the street to the coffee shop and grab a cup of coffee in the morning. Um, However, in many cases, it's going to have a negative impact. Think of a home that backs up to a car lot or an industrial complex. Okay. And again, if you're trying to sit in your backyard or sit on your front porch and you've got to look out and you have to see that industrial property, or maybe that industrial or commercial property has bright lights that are lit up at night in order to showcase their business or light up a parking lot, obviously that is going to have a negative impact on a home buyer's ability to peacefully enjoy that property. So you have to take that into consideration. And again, you have to use a little bit of a judgment call. Does this devalue the property by 5, 10, 15, 20%? Who knows? It's an X factor because you don't know. It's very difficult to accurately project how that X factor is going to impact the property's value upon resale. Now, the fifth and final X factor that I want to talk to you about today is a biggie. Okay. Now, there aren't many factors that are what I would call deal breakers, in that I would never purchase that property, but this X factor comes close, and that is flood zones. Now, flood zones are incredibly complicated. Flood zones are determined by Fema, and flood maps are redrawn every 5 years. Now, generally speaking, homes are not built in flood zones, because a home that is in a flood zone is required to carry flood insurance if you have any type of mortgage on that property, whether it be conventional or FHA, USDA, VA, any type of loan product. Any lender is going to require you to carry flood insurance. Flood insurance can be very pricey, folks. It can be anywhere from as little as $50 or $60 a month up to $500 or $600 a month just for flood insurance. Obviously, that affects that home buyer's ability to afford to purchase that property. Okay. And one thing to consider here is that even though, let's say, a particular neighborhood was built back in the 60s, and that neighborhood was not in the flood zone back in the 60s when that neighborhood was built. But again, remember, FEMA redraws flood maps every 5 years, and these flood maps are reassessed based on more recent data. So, For instance, here in Middle Tennessee, we had a huge flood back in 2010. If you lived in or around Nashville in 2010, you know what I'm talking about. And half of Nashville, half of Middle Tennessee was underwater. Well, after that happened, FEMA redrew the flood maps. So a lot of neighborhoods that previously didn't require flood insurance now were all of a sudden in that flood zone and now required flood insurance. I looked at a home in Nashville, I want to say it was 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a perfectly, well kept neighborhood, totally innocuous. You would never suspect that it was in a flood zone. But sure enough, I pulled up the FEMA maps, and there it was. The flood zone was totally encompassed the street of that neighborhood. Now, a couple things that I wanted to share with you. First of all, before you go look at a property, make sure that you pull up the FEMA flood maps. And I'll provide a link to the FEMA website where you can get those flood maps in the description below. So make sure that you check that out, save it as a favorite, save it as a bookmark on your computer, and always look at it before you go look at a property. Because again, even though a property wasn't in a flood zone 10, 20 years ago, it might be now, and you never know. Another thing that you want to do is always pull up an aerial, a satellite image of a target property and kind of zoom in to see what's around there. Do you see commercial properties? Do you see industrial properties? Do you see a mobile home park? Things of that nature. A lot of times, new investors will pull up a street view of a property, and the street view is great. Obviously, you can pan around, you can see what's around there, but a lot of times you're going to miss important information that is going to dramatically impact your offer on that target property. So, long story short, make sure that you do your due diligence before going to look at a property so that you can provide the most accurate offer possible. Make sure that you, as you look at that property, as you do your analysis on that property, you consider what is the sellability going to be here? How easy is it going to be for me to sell this property? Or if it's a rental property, how easy is it going to be for me to rent this property? Is somebody going to want to live in this property once I've rehabbed it and I've put it on the market? And then obviously you have to consider affordability. Again, the big one here is flood zones because and you really don't know how much flood insurance is going to cost on a home unless you call some insurance providers. Is that insurance policy going to cost them $50 or $60 a month or $500 a month? Because that is going to have a direct negative impact on that home's resale value. So thanks so much for following along. Those are my 5 X factors to consider when making offers on properties. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, please make sure that you like this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure that you subscribe so that you can stay abreast as we put new content out there. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.